Edward Loniewski, board certified orthopedic surgeon, here today at the AOAO conference in beautiful Colorado Springs at the historic Broadmoor. And we're here today because the AOAO decided to go ahead and have its first regenerative section meeting, which was awesome. And our actual first speaker that's going to be there today is Alberto Panero. He's a DO. He's from SAC Sportsmed.com. That's SACSportsmed.com. That's in Sacramento. And you've been doing regenerative medicine for quite some time.
Yes.
And he has a landmark paper that the day it came out, I referenced it in a conference. The day it came out, and this morning, I wake up this morning and I look at, and one of the first speakers today, guess what? They referenced your paper. So his paper is a landmark paper because it deals with the cellular content of some of these amniotic fluid preparations that we see advertised all over the place. So Albert, go ahead and tell us like how you got to this study and what you found.
Sure. So first of all, thanks for having me here. Just on a personal note, it's very humbling to be at this conference because AOAO was the first conference I went to in medical school.
No kidding.
Yeah, and it was actually New Orleans at the time. And it was one of those life-changing experiences because I got to really meet a lot of people, learn about academia, research, and how it is to come to these meetings and share such a wealth of information. So to come here, maybe 10 years later and get to speak, it's awesome.
Yeah, it's a full cycle.
Full cycle, yeah. But the paper came really out of a basic necessity. Because I wasn't really sure what these products were offering, right? So the idea that you can grab an allograft and use, potentially mesenchymal stem cells or growth factors and cytokines and inject them into a patient that maybe their own tissues wouldn't be very good, let's say they have multiple comorbidities, sounded like an awesome idea. And more interestingly was that if I could get a product that had standardized quantities of growth factors or cells per se, then we can try to start to dose, certain diseases. Like say we can start trying different things and saying, okay, for knee osteoarthritis, you need X amount of this growth factor or X amount of cells or whatever the case may be.
So the idea of using that product is really appealing to you,
of course.
And you really want to find these cells in there so that you can use that.
Sure. Yeah, because it does a few things. One, it avoids any potential complications from harvesting bone marrow, adipose, whatever the case may be. Also, time efficiency in clinic, right? So if you don't have to harvest and you can get the same results, but do it in a much smaller time frame, obviously that's better for everybody. It was a really great proposition. So then as I started looking more and more, one thing that got me was, okay, these products are being, stored on the shelf and they have a shelf life of a year or two, and then they're getting shipped to my clinic, and then I'm re-injecting them into the patient. And just from a common sense standpoint, I'm like, wait a minute, like how are these cells staying alive? How are these cells still viable, right? Because we're talking about living tissues, and even when we do PRP, bone marrow, these things are clotting, as immediately as you're doing them at times. You got to really be careful on how you, so I'm like, okay.
And maybe with PRP, 36 hours is like the max.
Right, so I'm like, how is this going to work long term? So that's when I decided to dive in a little bit deeper. And the more I asked questions, kind of the less information or less, real answers I got. So that's when we decided to come up with a study. And what we did is go to UC Davis Center for Regenerative Cures and came up with a protocol. And I asked them, okay, how would we test these? And they said, well, we can check to see if they're cellular or not, what the viability is. If there are cells, are there mesenchymal stem cells, or are they just other cells, right? And then we could also check for growth factors and, are they standardized or not. So once I came up with the protocol, I started reaching out to a lot of the companies. And, I got mixed answers in terms of companies that wanted to participate, others that did not. But anyways, 3 companies ended up participating. They sent in 3 lots. And for me, it was important not to only check the amniotic fluid samples, but to have some sort of control. So bone marrow seemed like the perfect one because we know it has mesenchymal cells. We know that it has growth factors, and we are very good at culturing and growing those guys out. So we used that, and then we also got a donation from UC Davis of just unprocessed amniotic fluid. And that was going to be another control to see if there was difference between the commercial products or not. So once we got everything in place, we thawed the products out, and the first thing we did was look at them under the microscope. And we saw that there were cells, right? So we're like, all right, well, good start. the count seemed to be low, but there were some cells. So let's say the next question was, okay, are these cells viable or not? So we stained them with trypan blue, and we noticed that there was about 50% viability. And what was really interesting was that even in between each company, there was a lot of difference between each lot. One lot would have no cells at all. The other one would have half dead, half alive, or all dead, right? Yeah. So a lot of variability there.
And also, let's kind of compare that to like normal, like bone marrow that we would have, or that placental fluid that you had as a control. Sure. Usually the viability in there is well above 90%.
Right, well above 90%. And that's kind of the thing is that, to go back a little bit, we know, or we think we really know that there are viable cells in amniotic fluid in these tissues, but at time zero, either immediately after birth or during pregnancy, where you do an amniocentesis. There's been multiple studies that show viable cells there. But it's, okay, what happens from that point to when you get the product to your office, right? So, okay, we established that there were some cells. There was 50% viability. Next step was checking, okay, are they MSCs or not? And we've chatted about this a little bit, that it's not just about one thing, right? You got to have multiple things. The cells have to be plastic adherent. They have to be able to differentiate into cartilage, bone, different things that MSCs are known to do in vitro. And they have to be triple positive and double negative in 5 factors, right? So we said, okay, let's go ahead and grow these guys out in culture, and then we'll control it with the unprocessed and the bone marrow, and we'll do everything the same way. And, we incubated them for about 28 days. And, after the time period was done, we washed them, we stained them, and we couldn't find any colony-forming units, essentially no mesenchymal stem cells from not only the 3 amniotic fluid products, but also the unprocessed. On the other hand, as we expected, the bone marrow grew out tons of colony-forming units, kind of proving that our methods were done correctly, right? So that was a little bit disappointing because I wanted there to be some cells, but we just could, at least in our study, we couldn't grow any out. So then he said, well, maybe all hope is not lost. Let's check for these growth factors, because we know with PRP and bone marrow, a lot of the goodies, or a lot of the good things that come from PRP or bone marrow, are actually through the growth factors, right? Yep. So we checked several growth factors that are sports medicine or orthopedic related, and they did test positive. But there was a lot of variability in between the products, which growth factor tested positive. They all seemed to be in lower quantities. And what was interesting was that the unprocessed amniotic fluid tested higher in all the growth factors than the commercial products. So what's happening, it seems, is that with the production of these commercial products, not only something's happening that's killing off the cells, but it's also really lowering the growth factor concentrations. And through that, there's no standardization. So it wasn't that every product had a standardized amount or a standardized quantity of these growth factors. So I think in conclusion, I think there's more work to be done. I think that we shouldn't put the lid on all these things altogether, but I think we have to find a much better way of processing them, right? And being able to get the cells, making sure that they remain viable, making sure that they're in high enough quantities that there might be a clinical effect from them. And also the same thing with the growth factors. Find a way to either concentrate them or make sure that at least each one has a standardized amount.
But from what we know so far, is through your study here, is that these products that are off the shelf, that are being used in a lot of clinics, that you may have a free lunch to go to, and fairly expensive, about $5,000. And let me tell you, everybody out there, there is no such thing as a free lunch. So that gives you a warning right away. But those products did not have any mesenchymal stem cells. Correct. They did have some growth factors, but the growth factor levels were much lower than what you would get through bone marrow. Correct. And we do feel that the growth factors are extremely important in these processes. And that some of these products are quite expensive, and sometimes can be more expensive than the stuff that we already have. Sure. So with that understood, now we have a standardization of how we can tell if you have stem cells or not. There's those 9 criteria that they have to meet. If they don't meet all 9, it's not a mesenchymal stem cell. And you've contributed significantly to literature that a lot of people quote now to have a standardization of telling people that if you are advertising that this is mesenchymal stem cell, it better have stem cells in it.
Correct. Yeah.
And he's going to be presenting today. He's just one of the great speakers that we have here today. We're again here at the AOAO conference in Colorado Springs at the Broadmoor. And remember, these are your cells for your healing.